It began on a quiet Sunday afternoon, the kind where the house breathes a slower rhythm. My husband had gone on an impromptu fishing trip with friends, leaving behind a stillness that felt both comforting and unfamiliar. The kind of quiet that invites reflection. I busied myself with tidying up, letting the soft clatter of dishes and the hum of routine distract me. Lucas, my 22-year-old stepson, was upstairs in his room. The faint sound of his music trickled down the stairs, a steady, rhythmic beat that filled the house without overwhelming it. We had lived together long enough to fall into an easy rhythm, polite nods, shared meals, and a mutual respect for personal space. But something about that day felt different. After the chores were done, I poured a glass of iced tea and sat by the kitchen window. Sunlight danced through the glass, casting a golden hue on the floor. A sense of restlessness stirred in me. Not discomfort but a quiet worry. A feeling that maybe Lucas needed someone to check in on him. Not as a parent figure but simply as someone who cared. With a soft knock I made my way upstairs. His door was slightly ajar and I could hear the mellow tones of his playlist drifting out. I hesitated. Lucas was an introspective young man, confident, yes, but also deeply private. I didn't want to intrude. But the silence in the air felt heavy, like something was unsaid. When I peeked in, he was sitting on the edge of his bed, his posture slumped, fingers fidgeting with something in his hands. He looked like he was thinking deeply. Maybe even struggling with something he hadn't voiced. I softly said, "Hey, just checking in, everything okay?" He looked up, surprised but not annoyed. A faint smile flickered across his face before fading into something more contemplative. "Yeah, just thinking," he replied quietly. I didn't push further. I offered him a reassuring nod and turned back toward the stairs, letting him know he had space but also support. Sometimes it's not the big conversations that matter. It's the quiet presence, the reminder that we're not alone even when we don't have the words. Lucas remained unaware of the world just beyond his door, lost in his own thoughts as the afternoon sun cast gentle rays across the wooden floorboards. I stood at a respectful distance, unsure if I should call out or retreat, letting him hold onto his solitude. Still, something in me, a quiet concern, kept my feet grounded there. The sunlight filtered in through the sheer curtain, scattering soft patterns across the room. It was peaceful. Almost too peaceful. Lucas sat still, elbows resting on his knees as lowered in quiet reflection. His posture said more than words ever could. Something was weighing on him. I shifted slightly, causing the door to creak. His head snapped up as meeting mine through the narrow opening. The look on his face, caught somewhere between surprise and vulnerability, made me instantly regret not knocking. For a heartbeat, neither of us spoke. The silence was intense, just unsure. "I didn't mean to startle you," I said gently, offering a small smile. "Just wanted to check if you were okay." Lucas blinked, nodded slowly, and looked down again. "Yeah, just thinking, that's all." I lingered for a second, then added, "You know I'm here if you ever want to talk, right?" He nodded once more, this time with a little more certainty. And that was enough. I turned and walked back down the hallway, leaving the door ajar just enough to let in the light. Some connections don't need words, they just need presence, quiet, steady, and honest. The sound of the creaking floor echoed faintly behind me. Lucas stirred first, sitting up abruptly, clearly surprised to find someone near his door. His hand pulled the blanket tighter around him as his expression shifted into one of embarrassment. "I didn't expect to see you here," he said quietly, his voice uncertain, maybe even a little ashamed. "I'm so sorry," I responded quickly, instinctively stepping back. I didn't mean to intrude. I wasn't aware anyone was in there. My words tumbled out too fast in an attempt to make things right. But Lucas raised a hand, gently stopping me mid-sentence. "It's okay," he said with a small shake of his head. Still, I could hear something in his voice, a subtle tremor, the kind that suggested there was more beneath the surface than he let on. "Just give me a moment," he added, not unkindly. I nodded, and quietly turned away, making my way back down the dim hallway. As I reached the top of the stairs I paused, gripping the banister. My thoughts spun in every direction. I shouldn't have lingered. I shouldn't have looked him without knocking. It wasn't what I saw that unsettled me. It was the sudden reminder of how little I truly knew about Lucas, his quietness, his distance, his guarded expressions. That brief glimpse revealed a version of him I had never fully recognized before, not as a child, but as a young man navigating his own emotions in silence. The door creaked again. Lucas stepped into the hallway, now dressed in a t-shirt and shorts. His posture was composed, but the color still lingered in his cheeks. "Sorry about that," he said, leaning casually against the doorframe, though his eyes didn't quite meet mine. "There's nothing to be sorry for," I replied gently. "I should have knocked." He nodded slowly. "Yeah, me too. I should have said something earlier." Before this felt weird. We both smiled awkwardly, neither of us quite sure what to say, but both understanding in our own quiet way that the moment had passed and would stay where it belonged in the past. "Thanks for checking in," he added before stepping back into his room, and I stood there for just a second longer, not out of confusion, but with a renewed sense of respect for his space, his boundaries, and the quiet way we were still learning to coexist. A subtle, nervous laugh slipped from Lucas's lips, lingering in the air like a question left unanswered. I tilted my head slightly, sensing a shift but unsure of its meaning. His eyes met mine, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth, more guarded than playful. "You caught me off guard," he said, voice low but composed, "though I guess I've done the same to you before." The words brought back a distant memory, a clumsy, awkward afternoon from the summer past. We'd both walked into a moment neither of us had meant to, but instead of dwelling on it, we'd laughed and moved on. Still, the recollection flickered now, unexpected and oddly persistent. "I guess that's true," I replied with a light chuckle, though my voice carried a hint of unease. Between us stretched an invisible thread, formed from familiarity but tinged now with something new, an emotional shift I couldn't quite place. The hallway, once just a space we crossed in passing, now felt like a pause in time. Lucas leaned casually against the doorframe, arms crossed, yet something in his stance hinted at uncertainty. I thought about leaving, letting the moment dissolve and giving him the space he might need. But the way his gaze briefly returned to mine held me there. It wasn't defiance or discomfort. It was something softer, hesitant, unspoken. I took a slow breath and offered gently, "Would you like to talk about what's on your mind?" His eyes widened slightly, clearly surprised. He shifted his weight, glancing down the hallway, then back at me. "Talk about what exactly?" "Anything," I said with a reassuring tone. "But if not, that's perfectly okay too. I just thought it might help." He rubbed the back of his neck, a classic gesture of someone caught between wanting to say something and fearing how it might sound. After a pause he mumbled, "I don't really know." "That's completely normal," I said quietly, taking a small step to lean against the opposite wall. "We all have moments that feel confusing or embarrassing. You're not the only one." He let out a breath, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. "Thanks," he said, voice barely above a whisper. I smiled, a quiet gesture of solidarity. And for the first time in what felt like a long while, Lucas smiled back, not forced or awkward, but genuine. For now that was enough. He turned toward me and something in his expression softened, not dramatically, but just enough to feel real. "You always seem calm," he said, a hint of curiosity in his voice. "Like you've got everything under control." The comment caught me off guard. I wasn't sure how to respond at first. A part of me wanted to laugh, another part to confess how untrue that really was. "I'm not as steady as you think," I replied gently, my voice lower than usual. "I've just had more practice pretending." He tilted his head, steadying me with quiet focus, as if trying to see past the version of me he'd known all these years. "You're nothing like Dad," he said after a pause. "Not in a bad way, just different." I nodded, choosing my words carefully. "That's probably true, but sometimes different can be good." He gave a thoughtful nod in return, though his eyes still held a trace of something unspoken. The silence between us lingered, not heavy, not uncomfortable, just honest. Lucas let out a small breath, and the tension in his frame began to ease. I could tell he was slowly letting his guard down, allowing the quiet to settle without needing to fill it. "You really believe that?" he asked, looking down, almost as if the question was more to himself than to me. "I do," I said simply. "You have more strength than you give yourself credit for, and you don't need anyone's approval to prove that." A subtle shift passed over his face, like the weight he'd been carrying had lightened just a little. He offered a faint smile. "Brief but genuine." "Thanks," he said, almost in a whisper. "You're welcome," I replied, matching his quiet tone. We stood there for another few moments, not saying anything more, but understanding enough had already been said in that pause. Something unspoken passed between us, not tension, not discomfort, just a shared awareness that we were both still learning, still trying, still human, and that, for now, was more than enough. The silence between us shifted, not into awkwardness, but into something quieter like understanding. Lucas gave a small smile, one that didn't quite reach his eyes but still held meaning. For the first time that afternoon, I felt a small wave of relief wash over me. Maybe he really was okay. Still, a faint trace of unease lingered beneath the calm. There was something unspoken in the air, something I couldn't quite define. Lucas's eyes met mine and held them a second longer than usual, not confrontational, just searching. Then, without another word, he stepped away from the doorframe and sighed lightly. "I think I should do something productive," he said with a weak smile, half joking but also unsure. No pressure, I offered, smiling gently. "There's no timeline, take it one step at a time." He nodded, our eyes meeting again for a moment before he turned and closed the door behind him. I remained for a second, staring at the closed door, the stillness of the hallway settling around me. Back downstairs, I tried to keep myself busy, folded laundry, sorted through some papers, but my mind kept circling back to that conversation, not because anything was wrong but because something had changed. He'd let me see a side of him that was rarely shown that evening. I curled up with a book, hoping for a moment of quiet, but the words on the page refused to hold my attention. I found myself listening to the silence upstairs, to the way the house seemed to hold its breath, and then soft footsteps on the stairs. I looked up. Lucas appeared, his hair tousled and his expression thoughtful. He looked like someone still sorting through his thoughts but willing to share. "Hey," he said, his voice quiet, almost unsure. "Hey," I replied, closing the book gently in my lap. "You all right?" He nodded. "I think I just needed to talk to someone. Is that okay?" "Of course it is," I said softly, motioning to the seat beside me. He sat down, not too close, not too far. And in that space between us, safe, respectful, and calm, we began to talk. I paused at the base of the staircase, drawn by the faint sound of water running into the kettle. The soft splash echoed in the stillness of the house. The kitchen was warm, filled with the comforting scent of tea leaves and quiet focus. Lucas stood at the counter, back turned, carefully preparing the tea. His movements were methodical and calm, focused like someone who found comfort in routine. "Do you prefer it strong or mild?" he asked, glancing over his shoulder, his tone casual. "Strong, please," I replied after a brief pause, surprised at how grounding the simple question felt. The water began to boil, its low hiss blending with the quiet clink of porcelain. He set 2 mugs on the counter with practiced ease. "Still like honey in yours?" he asked, glancing back with a brief smile. "I do," I answered with a nod, leaning lightly on the counter. There was a peaceful silence between us as he poured the water and let the tea steep. It wasn't uncomfortable, just reflective, a moment of normalcy that we both seemed to appreciate. He handed me the mug, and I accepted it with a small smile. We each took a sip in silence. I watched the steam rise from his cup, curling gently in the soft light. Then he spoke, his voice quiet but clear. "Do you ever think about how much we carry? Just trying to live up to what people expect of us?" I looked at him, surprised by the openness in his question. "All the time," I admitted. "It's easy to forget who you really are when you're trying so hard to meet expectations." He nodded, the corners of his lips lifting slightly. Not quite a smile, but something close. "It's exhausting," he said softly. "Yes," I agreed, "but it's also okay to stop, to take a breath and ask yourself what you want." A pause, and then more quietly, "Thanks for saying that." "You're welcome." We didn't need to say more. The moment was enough. A reminder that even in silence, connection can grow, not from tension, not from misunderstanding, but from shared truths and a willingness to listen. "The journey takes time," I said gently, "and sometimes, walking through uncertainty is just part of finding your way." Lucas tilted his head slightly, thoughtful, and for a moment, our eyes met, not in tension, but in quiet understanding. "But what if the truth scares me?" he asked. "What if I learn something I'm not ready for?" His honesty struck me. I took a breath, trying to steady my own voice. "It's natural to feel afraid," I said softly, "but that doesn't make you any less strong. You're allowed to move slowly. There's no rush to figure it all out at once." He offered a faint smile, though his eyes remained distant. You make it sound easier than it is. I never said it's easy, I replied with a quiet smile of my own. But I'll be here, whatever the pace. That's what family does. He didn't answer right away. He simply nodded, as if carrying that thought somewhere deeper inside. We sat in silence, sipping our tea. It wasn't uncomfortable, just heavy with everything. Neither of us quite knew how to say. Eventually, he set his cup down. I think I'll head up, he said, his voice quiet but steady. To bed, I asked. He nodded. Yeah, good night, Lucas, I said with a small smile. Good night, he replied, his voice soft. As he climbed the stairs, I remained in the kitchen a while longer. The day had left its mark, not through confrontation, but through conversation. I didn't have all the answers, and neither did he. But for now that was okay. Sleep evaded me as I lay in bed. The gentle rustling of the trees outside offered little comfort. The day's conversations echoed in my mind, especially the look on Lucas's face, the weight behind his words, the questions he had yet to ask. I turned onto my side, hoping rest would come. It didn't. Eventually, I rose and headed quietly to the kitchen. The moonlight spilled softly through the windows as I poured myself a glass of water. The house was silent, yet not in an empty way. More like it was holding space for thought. I didn't expect to see Lucas appear in the hallway, walking slowly, hands in his pockets. He noticed me and gave a faint nod. Couldn't sleep? I asked gently. He shook his head. Too much on my mind. Same here. We didn't need to say much. The kitchen, quiet and warm, became our meeting place. We sat at the table, a small lamp casting a golden hue over the worn surface between us. I've been thinking, he said after a while, voice quiet but firm, about what you said earlier about letting go of expectations. I listened. It's harder than I thought, he admitted. Most of my life, I've tried to be who everyone needed me to be. Now, I don't know what's left. I nodded slowly. That's a hard place to be, but it's also the start of something honest. He looked down, his fingers tracing a line on the tabletop. I don't have many answers, I continued, but I know this. Finding yourself doesn't have to be rushed. Just stay open to it, let it come. He gave a small nod. Thank you, he said. You're not alone, I replied, meaning every word. We sat there a while longer, two people sharing quiet company in the middle of the night. No urgency, no confusion. Just understanding. Lucas sat at the edge of the couch, shoulders tense, fingers knotted together. I took a seat nearby, not close enough to intrude, but near enough that he would know I was truly there. Lucas, I said softly, you don't have to figure it all out tonight. It's okay to be unsure. He looked up slowly, his eyes tired. What if I don't even know who I am without those expectations? That question alone means you're already searching, I replied, and that takes courage. There was a long silence, not awkward, just full. Like we were both holding space for what needed. Time to rise. He gave a small nod. Thanks for not pushing me. You don't need to thank me, I said with a gentle smile. That's what family does. We show up even when there are no perfect words. His expression softened. Not all the way, not completely, but just enough. The tension in the room faded. Get some rest, I added. I'll try. As he headed back toward his room, I stayed behind for a moment, letting the quiet settle around me. I didn't feel uncertain now, just steady. Not everything had to be resolved. Sometimes just being present was enough. I've never told you how much your support has meant to me, Lucas said quietly. His words caught me off guard, hitting with the weight of something long held but never spoken. I swallowed hard, my throat tight with emotion. Lucas, I said softly, my voice trembling, you never needed to say it out loud. Your presence, your growth has always meant more than you know. I just want you to find peace, to be happy. He gave a faint, tired smile. I'm not sure I know what that looks like yet. That's okay, I replied. You don't need to know today. You're allowed to take your time. He looked down at his hands, fidgeting slightly. The tension in his shoulders hadn't fully eased, but there was a quietness in him now, a soft vulnerability that felt new. You once told me that I didn't have to live by other people's expectations, he said. It sounds simple, but it's not. I've spent so long trying to fit into something. I don't even know who I'm underneath at all. I took a breath and moved a little closer, careful not to invade his space. What's underneath is still forming. That's part of life. You're not broken, Lucas. You're unfolding. A moment passed. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of the lamp and the stillness of night pressing gently against the windows. Sometimes I'm afraid I'll mess this up. He admitted. You won't. I said with calm certainty, and if you ever stumble, you'll have people here to help you stand again. He looked at me then, really looked, and for the first time in a long while, there was no fear in his eyes, just someone trying, honestly and openly, to find his place in the world. Thank you. He said simply, you're welcome. I replied, now get some rest. Tomorrow is waiting. He gave a small nod and stood slowly. As he headed back toward his room, I remained for a moment, letting the peace of that quiet understanding settle into my chest. No grand gestures, no need for dramatic words, just the slow, steady healing of two people learning how to exist together, with patience, kindness, and a shared hope for something better. Silence stretched between us. A quiet space not of avoidance, but of reflection. It was the kind of stillness that only existed when words were too heavy to carry. When thoughts were still finding shape, Lucas sat with his shoulders slightly hunched, his eyes fixed on the floor. Fingers clasped tightly together. I've never truly told you how grateful I am for everything you've done, he said, barely above a whisper. His words struck a chord in me. I drew in a slow breath, feeling the weight of everything unspoken finally break the surface. You don't need to say it, I said softly, your presence. Your willingness to let me be here for you, that's enough. He nodded slightly, his voice trembling. Sometimes I don't know what happiness looks like anymore, and I'm scared that without knowing I'll keep missing it. I sat quietly, allowing the honesty of his words to settle between us. You're not expected to have all the answers, I said. Life doesn't come with a map, but your questions, your search, that's where healing begins. Lucas exhaled, his chest rising and falling slowly. His gaze lifted, meeting mine not with intensity but with quiet openness. I've spent so long trying to be what everyone wanted me to be. I'm just now realizing I don't even know who I am underneath all that. You're not alone in that, I replied. Most people, myself included, spend years trying to figure that out. It's okay to feel lost sometimes. He leaned back in his chair, the tension in his shoulders finally beginning to ease. I'm ready to start, he said. I smiled, not out of triumph but relief. Then you already have. As the evening settled in around us, the earlier weight in the room gave way to something softer, an unspoken understanding that the path ahead may be long, but it didn't have to be walked alone. He stood and gave me a small nod of acknowledgement. Quiet, respectful, and deeply human. Sleep well, Lucas, I said as he made his way toward the hallway. You too, he replied, and as I sat alone for a few minutes longer, I felt something rare. A calmness I hadn't known I needed, a reminder that not every bond is built on grand gestures. Sometimes healing begins with presence, with listening, with choosing to stay.